Hey, Composite Gloves here, and today we're going to be going over the answers for the Harmony 1 test. I think this is important. When teachers don't go over tests or hand back homework or any of those sorts of things, I get a little miffed because I think that's that's the way you learn. When you see your mistakes and you're told, hey, that was wrong. So let's go ahead and go over some of these answers. So first, we have construct the E-flat major scale. And there's a couple ways you could have done this. You could have written in a key signature and used the order of flats. You'd be like, okay, E-flat has 3 flats. Maybe you went ahead and memorized how many flats are in each one. So you put it down, and then you just wrote the notes from E to E. No accidentals needed. That's perfectly okay. Valid way of doing it. You'd get full credit. I was envisioning you using the chromatic intervals. Well, there's just intervals to make it. So, octave or unison, major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, those to make it. You could also use the whole step, half step method. I frown upon this method. I'd probably, if I were to grade your test and I saw that you wrote whole, whole, half on your paper, I would write a frowny face and say next time there will be minus points, but you get full credit because it's still the right answer. You did it correctly, but from a learning perspective and working efficiently perspective, I do not want to encourage using that system. And so if you wrote out the intervals or whatever, that'd be fine. Just make sure you got the notes down. This should not have taken you too long to do. Like if you're sitting here sort of struggling your way through it, I suggest going through and making more scales, get faster at it. So we have what is the 5th scale degree in G minor. And so you make the G minor scale. Maybe you made the G major scale and went to the G minor. Later on, we'll learn a method of doing this very quickly with chords. As soon as we start making chords, a lot of these things will sort of speed up. But knowing your scales down like pat will always be a great blessing because the chords begin to interact with the scales and the whole thing becomes a mess if you're not comfortable with both. So we have the 5th scale degree and we say, oh, it's D. So there we go. What is a tritone from B natural? And so we know a tritone is a augmented 4th or diminished 5th. And so whatever that note is, that's the one we need to put. And so we say, oh, a tritone from B natural is F. And you could write it out on the paper, or you could actually just count it out chromatically in this case. So you go C, and you go unison, minor second, minor third. Whoops, starting over here. This is our unison, right? Minor second, minor third, perfect fourth, tritone, perfect fifth. So we say, oh, it's F natural. So there you have it. Exciting, right? Okay, moving on. Next up, we have construct the intervals from the given bass note. So I give you a bass note, and you've got to make the interval above that. So we have a major second, so that would be D, a major third from C, a minor third from C, so that would be a B flat. And then over here, I gave you sort of a tricky one. I'd be curious to see. Some of you may have completely ignored the fact that this is in a measure, and that'd be fine as long as your notes are right. But ideally, you put a C sharp here and made this a C natural. Like it's sort of a tricky. If you caught that, you'd get like +1 on your paper or something. But basically, remember that when we're working with accidentals, the accidental is an exception from the key signature. So right now our key signature says C major or A minor, however you want to look at it. And so we put an exception here. So this only applies to this octave. So an octave from C is obviously C, but we actually don't need a natural here because it's in a different octave. And so it actually conforms to our key signature, so we're okay. So we talked about that in previous videos, so I'm not going to reiterate it, but if you caught that, you would definitely get like some sort of extra credit. That's really good. Okay, so we're going over to the next one. So we have a minor second, a perfect fourth, a tritone. Again, now this is ambiguous. Some of you may have been like, oh, what does he want? Does he want an augmented fourth, the diminished fifth? Either one is fine. So this is just, it's up to you what you want to put. I ended up putting a diminished fifth. You may have put something else. And then finally, we have this one, which is where I would catch the people who chromatically count. I don't want to ding them because usually they're pretty good with intervals, but I definitely want to catch them once or twice. So if you count chromatically, you probably put a B natural here, and that's wrong. So it feels nicer to put a B natural, but it's outside the key. And when we're thinking in keys, that's just going to be an eyesore. And it also breaks the system. There's a number of reasons that we talked about already why we wouldn't do that. So remember, you would start at the bottom and you'd count up 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we find out, oh, this must be a C. It cannot not be a C. It has to be a C. And so when you count it chromatically, you're going to be like, oh, but it's a B natural. And so in order to make the C a B natural, we put a flat. So There you have it. So hopefully you got that right. Define what is the tonic, leading tone, and dominant. So the tonic's the first scale degree, leading tone's the seventh, and the dominant is the fifth. Switched up the order on you. See if you were paying attention. These are ones that I pointed out and said, hey, these are really important to remember. So I put them out in a question where you have to type out the answer. Now I used really formal sentences, but if you wrote the first, seventh, fifth scale degrees and whatnot, you are fine. Maybe you did the order in a different order too, but you get the idea. So, okay, what is the difference between a key and a scale? And we talked about this. A scale is a group of notes we work with. A key is referencing the harmonic structure that goes along with those group of notes. They can be used interchangeably, but they have these sort of different perspectives when we look at it. This is one on a test where some people may have written like an essay and other people wrote like one sentence. It's kind of interesting. I'm going through school seeing how much some people write on their tests. Identify the following intervals. So I gave you these intervals and all you had to do is identify them. And so we have a perfect fifth, a major third, minor third, minor seven, minor. So remember, we just count. We can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Like, oh, or you could think this is a D, that's an E. So that's one less than an octave. So it's got to be a 7. And then you say, well, is it major or minor? Well, it's got to be a half step if it's going to be major. And so it's not. So that means that it would have to be D sharp to get to an E natural, but it's not. It's a D. So that's a whole step. So it's got to be a minor 7. So that's this sort of thought process I'm hoping you're running through rather quickly while you're working. So we come over here. We got an augmented fourth. That's what the plus means. You may have written aug. That is fine. A diminished fifth. So some interesting ones here. These are both tritones. And so on. If you wrote tritone, that would be like a -1 or whatever. I'm not sure how many marks I'd give for this. Maybe like a mark for each. So I'd actually mark that wrong because you have a more specific, more exact way of doing things. If you're going to be ambiguous, that's fine under certain circumstances. Like over here, I give you some options, but we should really be more exact if we're like identifying things. Okay, so we have construct the F melodic minor scale. I chose to work in the bass clef. You can work in whatever clef you want. And so I'd be a cool professor. If you worked in a different clef, if you worked in like separate clefs all the time, then I would give you like an extra point at the end or something, because that's good habit. Okay, so we have construct the F melodic minor scale. And so there you have it. We lower the third on the way up, and we lower the 3, 6, and 7 on the way down. And we have a B flat as in our F scale already. So great. Same for now. We have construct the C sharp major scale. Some of you are probably thinking you don't ever use the C sharp major scale, and it's true. It's less common, but it is used. And there's a whole bunch of nifty papers that are written about. These are like highfalutin academic papers, but they're written about the differences in writing in each key. Because someone with relative pitch, ideally they'd sound the same each time, but they don't. And there's a huge number of reasons why. Some of them gets into sound design, so it's kind of cool. So yeah, C sharp major. We have construct the B harmonic minor scale. So here's the B harmonic minor scale. The way I went about it was I constructed the major scale, and then I lowered the third and the sixth. That was it. Cool. Now, you have the luxury, if you did this in MuseScore, which you probably did, of actually hearing it. You could play it back and check. But you don't have that luxury when you're taking a written final in a classroom. So you got to be pretty confident about the notes you put down. Okay, so we have what is a key signature and why do we use it? And this is sort of, there could be a huge number of answers here. But a key signature is just how you define your key at the beginning. And we use them. And what I was hoping you would write is we use them to think more effectively because we're thinking in keys. So we like to think in keys. That's a better thing. And then a lot of you probably wrote, we use it to avoid using sharps or flats. I'm really looking for this other part. If you didn't write that other part, it'd be like -0.5 a point or something. But the avoiding sharps and flats, all these extra, they're not really accidentals because an accidental is an exception to the key signature. But we just call them that just because it's bled over to the point where now they're interchangeable. But yeah, so the key signature thing is the thing I'm really hoping you got. Okay, can we determine the key of a song by looking at the key signature? And we say, and then you'd have to explain, and you'd be like, no, you can't, because you'd have to look at the song, see what kind of chords they're using, because it could be major or it could be minor. So you can't do that. All right, moving over. What is the shurd? What is the third sharp in the order of sharps? And you'd write out the order of sharps. If you did, that's fine. And remember the acronym BEAD GCF is the order of flats. So going backwards is the order of sharps. We say, oh, the third sharp is G. And over here, I ask what the fourth flat is. And you'd be like, oh, it's a D. What intervals can never be major or minor? So I was looking for perfect intervals. But if you wrote something like augmented or diminished, those are technically correct. So I'd give you credit. Why is it better to know chromatic intervals rather than memorizing half step and whole step formulas? So I just talked about that. But it's better because it allows us, we'll be able to build chords much more rapidly. And there's a number of other harmonic analysis tools that we have an advantage for if we learn the intervals rather than relying on whole step and half step to build scales and things. However, it is a useful thing. It is useful. Like, you should know about it. But yeah, that's the question, the answer. There you go. Write a 4-bar phrase in the scale of your choosing. Explain how you used the scale. So you just have to write some music. Now here, there's like an endless number of things. I'm just looking for you to use terminology we've talked about and write something that, makes some sense. And again, keep your stuff reasonable. If you wrote like some impossible thing, I would frown upon that and I'd write unrealistic melody and give you -1 or something. Now, there are like strict melody writing rules, but we don't talk about those for a long while. So you could write anything. I didn't follow any of those rules here. So we say here, so this is my melody. It sounds like this. Maybe you use the key signature again. You could totally use it. Right now, I kind of want you to use it right in your sharps and flats. So I use the key of D major, and you could see that. Maybe you chose a minor key. That's totally fine. And I said, I start my melody with the tonic. You don't always have to. Another great starting place, the fifth. You can start anywhere, really. But the fifth and the tonic are the most common for tonal writing. And then I say, I leverage the leading tone. So you see we're using our terminology here to give the listener guidance. So it's not really dissonance. Like, it is dissonancy, but like right here, this moment, that part. See, it pulls. So I'm guiding the listener where I want them to go. And I strove to create an interesting contour while staying diatonic. So I remain diatonic. I don't choose any other notes outside the key. Maybe you did. I'd expect an explanation if you did. And then strove to create an interesting contour just means I wanted an interesting shape. So it's not something boring that's just like up and down and then done, like a scale or something. It's like, oh, we go up, we have some rhythmic variation, but then we like level out right here. We jump down, we crawl back up and go down a little bit. So it's an interesting shape to listen to. We'll talk about contour again also later. So that's what's going on there. Like, that's a judgment call, but if you did something along these lines, you'd get full marks. Unless you did something weird. What is the difference between a melodic and harmonic interval? And so we say, a melodic interval is an interval over time. It sounds like a melody, That would be a melodic interval. Here's a harmonic interval. Played at the same time, like a chord. What does diatonic mean? Diatonic, it means only notes from the selected scale are used. So we talked about this. We use this term quite a bit. This is really a term you should know. It's a fancy one. It's worth saying to your friends, right? What are the interval equivalents of the half step and whole step? I have met people who can't answer this, but they can do the interval exercise, which blows my mind. But remember, the half step is a minor second. Whole step is a major second. That's all we're using. So when you use half step, whole step, you're essentially expressing everything in a unit of minor seconds and major seconds. Yeah. What two numbering systems do we use for scale degrees? We talked about this. We use Roman numerals. In the Arabic system, you could have just wrote regular numbers. However you wanted to say this, you didn't have to be fancy and use Arabic. You could have said something else. But regular numbers and Roman numerals, that's what I was looking for. And so we say, next up. Now, if you didn't know what the answer was, here you maybe could have gone back like, oh, that's the answer. So what is the advantage of Roman numerals? So we say, the advantage, right? They allow us to express chord qualities and scale degrees. And I could have added at the same time. So chord qualities, we have major, minor, augmented, diminished, and we could also combine it with figure bass and get some very useful harmonic analysis. Why would we use numbers for scale degrees? And then we talked about this just to make general observations. And you could have written, they're very convenient to use when speaking, saying out loud. People don't say like Roman numerals or speak in figure bass, but we do speak in numbers. So if you wrote something about that as well, I'd give you credit. What is the second scale degree called? And then it's just the supertonic. It's the second scale degree. And then we have some true false. Gotta love the true false ones, right? Sometimes they're head scratchers. So here's one. Scale degrees have different names in minor keys than major keys. And some of you might have written false, but it's true. Remember, we have the seventh, which is called the leading tone. But if it's not that half step, it's called the subtonic. And that's because it's expressing the relationship between, it's expressing the fundamental harmonic relationship going on. So if that relationship changes, the order of importance of the notes change, then we can't really use those terms anymore, or at least we can't keep the terms the same. So this is true. Using a keyboard and counting chromatically will always produce the correct interval. And that's false. And we saw an example of that earlier. You may end up with the correct note, but the wrong inharmonic. And so we're thinking outside of the key now. So that's bad. So it's false. The natural minor scale is the version of the minor scale we should base our key signatures on. That's true. Because if we based it on other, like the harmonic minor scale, we're going to be ending up with some weird looking key signatures. So it's better that we use the natural minor because it corresponds with major. It makes modulation a bit easier too. And then we just notate in when we're writing an exception or taking advantage of a particular different version of the minor scale. So we say, okay. And then this last one, you could write a lot. Music theory is all I need to know to write great music. And so this one, I'm not really sure I could grade. Everyone would probably get full credit if they wrote anything. But you say, I thought it was false. You might disagree. I'd love to see your argument. But there are lots of other skills. You have like orchestration. You could argue that's part of theory. We could get into like, well, that's included in music theory. I consider orchestration a separate skill, like a subset tool, maybe of music theory, but it's really its own deal. We have sound design, which is overlooked all the time. I also could have written mixing and mastering, and we have like people skills, things that a lot of people don't realize when you want to write great music. You could arguably do without some of these. Like you need inspiration, right? You want some inspiration. And then I follow up with like, these are not all required, but few people would deny that you need some mix of these things. That music theory by itself is not going to get you the full all the way. And then I thought at the end, I'm like, oh yeah, performing, because you need an excellent performance of your music if you're going to make it. And so you could get into is the written music on the page, is that considered the great thing, or is once it's played considered the great thing? So this is sort of a deep question when you think about it. But it's one I wanted to include just to get you thinking. It also scares students in tests. They're like, oh my gosh, he's going to grade this. What the heck does he want? And the answer is, I just want you to think. That's it. I just want you to think about that thing. If you have any questions about this, let me know. If you noticed a mistake somewhere along the lines that I missed, I don't believe I have any. But if you catch one, let me know. And yeah. Hopefully you passed and you're ready to move on to next level things. If you had a hard time doing this quickly or things came pretty slow, I encourage you, especially with intervals, if doing intervalic exercises, building scales, identifying intervals, making intervals was hard, it's only going to become harder and more ingrained as we get higher up. Music theory is very unforgiving if you can't do it at a decent speed. So make sure to just go back and brush up. And maybe you got the answers right, but you're a bit slow. Make them fast. Support me on Patreon. I really appreciate it. I'm trying to really step up my game as far as like quality, and this testing I think is a really good experience. Subscribe and have a blessed day.